Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. This is Ask Me Anything, Astoria Public Library's historical collections. And I am Rachael Woody. I'm the consulting archivist for this project, and I consult for archives, museums, and cultural heritage institutions. And my work with Astoria Public Library has been going for 3+ years now. I've had the pleasure of working with Jimmy Pearson and John Goodenberger and getting to know the collections, helping to do a collection assessment, helping train volunteers and staff to rehouse and take care of these wonderful materials. And now we're working towards, now that the materials are being taken care of, getting them digitized and put online is the next big step that I am currently helping Astoria with. And John has been my partner on this. So let me move on to his slide. And John, please introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm John Goodenberger, and I'm the city historian for the City of Astoria. And I am hired for special projects such as this. And we've been working, as Rachael said, since about 2017 to make order and make sense of the basement. And that has meant coming in and collecting objects, collecting collections, putting them in folders, getting them on spreadsheets, and getting them ready to be scanned for the public so that the public can understand exactly what is down here.
Mhm. And of course, we want to take a moment to introduce Jimmy as well. He's not here on the Ask Me Anything with us, but he is the boss of all of us. He's the director for the Astoria Public Library. He's the vision behind this, and really the passion and energy that he's brought to this project has helped to reveal these treasures and have us spend time and expertise getting them out and hopefully into the public. So this is Jimmy, and he is the library director for Astoria Public Library. And we do want to take a moment to thank Oregon Cultural Trust. Initially, this was supposed to be an in-person lecture, but of course, as you can see, I'm in my home office. John is actually on site in the vortex of the public library. And we're doing this virtually in this era of COVID. But thanks to Oregon Cultural Trust, we've been able to continue our work on this collection and have gotten creative in terms of how we are sharing that with our community. And of course, this project would not be possible without the volunteers that have helped us out. We want to say a special thank you to Chelsea Billings, Autumn Buckridge, Melissa Gardner, Lynn Johnson, Sheila Nolan, Hannah Phelps, Jack Ross, Brooke Willoughby, and a special thanks to Jeff Daly for the lighting and Eric Williams with scanning. And thanks to Ove and Barbara Rasmussen and Lauren Wilson. And a quick note, many of you here are fans of Astoria Public Library and Astoria history, so you may already be aware that John and I have done a few collection features previous to doing this lecture event. So I'll drop a link in the chat for you that you can click on, but if you're viewing this later, this is the link to our playlist where you will see all of the collection features for Astoria, so you can go check those out if you haven't seen them. And a few items of housekeeping before we jump into the excellent questions you've submitted. First, note that this session is pre-recorded and the questions were gathered ahead of time. And that's because John and I wanted to make sure we had time to pull all the appropriate materials that you would want to see and really maximize the information we are going to share with you today. So questions are ahead of time, but if you are joining us for this premiere, there is a chat box next to this video. You can type any sort of follow-up questions you have in that, or at the end, there will be a slide where you can email your questions if you think of them later or if you're viewing this later. As I said, resource links will be shared in the chat day of, but if you're viewing this on YouTube, we'll have them also in the YouTube footnote descriptions. And this recording will be made available to the public, so you'll be able to find it next day on YouTube And for those who have registered for this event, a link will be sent to you. And I do want to note there is closed captioning available. It is auto-generated by YouTube, so there may be some slight wording mistakes, but there is closed captioning if you would like it. If you hover in the video window, that menu will pop up. And also, if the video is too small for you on your screen, there is a full screen option that you can click. It's, hovering over the same window where you can do that full screen option. And with that, we have our first question, John, and that is, how big is the APL, which is Astoria Public Library, historical collection? And I've got some numbers, but John, I'd love to hear your description of it first.
Huge. It's overwhelming. We have so much that's here, and it's a wide swath of history, really. You have the numbers. I have kind of the understanding of just the breadth of information that we have here, from city to county to personal collections, from books to newspaper clippings to objects. I mean, it's really phenomenal what we have here.
Absolutely. Astoria, as our viewers may or may not know, is the first and oldest non-native settlement on the Pacific coast. And with that comes a very interesting history, a very long history. And the collection really does represent not just the history for Astoria, but for the region. So yes, some excellent treasures there. You see John currently on site. He's in one section of where the collections are kept. And we're going to show a couple pictures in a moment. But if you're a numbers person, I do have there are approximately 70,500 items, which takes up, in archival terms, we measure things by linear foot, which is how much space it takes up on the shelf. And that's approximately 1,200 linear feet. And a linear foot, if you're familiar with banker's boxes, those are each about one linear foot. So imagine 1,200 of those side by side. And then there has been some excellent digitization work happening with one of the volunteers, Eric. And the last numbers that I got from him a couple months ago, so it's probably gone up since then, is there are approximately 20,000 of the 70,000 items that are digitized. And those are what we are working to get online very soon. And here are some of the pictures. So we have John live in the vortex, and then this is across from John. And would you like to describe what's in this picture?
Sure. This is the central area of the basement of the library. So the basement of the library is a quarter of a city block in footprint, and it's 12 feet high. And I know that some people in Astoria might be a little bit concerned about having things in a basement, but we keep track in the basement of the humidity and temperature, and it apparently is perfect for archival storage. So this photograph that that you're looking at right now is in the central section. Early in the project, we had started to do some organization, but early in the project, so you can start to see that this has been has been a lot of things down here and not necessarily a lot of order to them.
Mm-hmm. And I believe we have one more picture. And is this an after picture?
This is an after picture. And so it's all open now. And Jimmy Pearson had this idea that he would set it up like a lecture hall, because the concept is that when we do a renovation here, that we'll actually have a meeting space that will be accessible to everyone. And so he set it up with the chairs that used to be in the flag room, these wonderful Eames chairs that used to be in the flag room. So it not only gives you a sense of the scale of the place, but it also gives you a sense of what this could be in the future.
I love that. Next question. What is the most unusual artifact in the collection, and what is the history of that artifact?
Well, I came across this early on, and it's still my favorite. And it's a blacksmith ledger that dates between 1811 and 1819. And it's wrapped in newspaper from that period. That's how we're also able to get the dates besides the handwritten notes. Um, and what I like about that, first, let me just, um, I'll open this up for a moment. And you can see that it has the writing inside and it has all these different things that the blacksmith is making. And we know it's not from here because we didn't have horses here during that time. But what I like about this is it ties together so many pieces. At the very corner of the bottom, it mentions the US sloop of war Ontario is heading south. Well, the Ontario will come to Astoria 1 year later in 1818. And that's that when that ship arrives, it will return Astoria and this region back to the United States, or at least a dual occupancy with Britain. So I find that really interesting. And then we also have up in the corner where Congress is voting to hire an artist to do the murals in Washington, D.C. that we all know, with Washington crossing the river and all of these wonderful events. And we have a newspaper, the Brother Jonathan, from the 1840s that has one of those images engraved on the front page. And the Brother Jonathan was well known for having these super, super detailed etchings. And here you can see that on the front cover of the Brother Jonathan. Right, so that's a photograph of the exterior, the newspaper wrapping around the ledger. And then that's a view inside the ledger itself.
And I just, you know, history, that's one cool part of it, but even just the handwriting, the quality of the ink, the details that are captured here is just so fascinating in terms of like having that connection to another person separated by centuries. And
Right.
it's just beautiful. All right, next question. What artifact was the most difficult to figure out how to archive? Would you like me to start or would you like to go first?
Well, I'll just talk in the general sense. And that is, it's not necessarily an artifact, it's the space itself. The space itself being so large and having gone so long without having people, come down here and work and continue to organize. So it's the volume
Mm-hmm.
that has been the most difficult aspect. And honestly, without my students from the Historic Preservation Program at Classic Community College coming down and helping me, as well as other members of the community, this would not be happening at the pace that it is. It's been unfortunate during COVID that I've been bumping around alone in the basement since March. But once this gets over, we'll get some volunteers back down here that can help out.
Mm-hmm. Yes, from my perspective as an archivist, thinking back to when I did the collection assessment, which was sort of a kickoff to all of this work, um, while Jimmy and John had certainly been chipping away at the basement because it is so massive, there hadn't really been like a an evaluation of all of the materials. And so that was part of my task was to figure out what content is in here, what format of the materials are in here, how much of it there is, and what physical state it's in. And because there were so much materials down there, in addition to other storage things, because it was a basement first and foremost for a while, that meant that some of the materials were damaged, but nobody knew they were damaged. And from an archival perspective, the most difficult thing to try and save or preserve is paperwork that has been water damaged specifically. There's not really a good way to reverse that once it's been so damaged and then for so long. And so, unfortunately, some of the city records, there was a leak or something, and one of the boxes at the bottom, it was just completely sodden, and nobody had any idea how long it had been wet because it had been down there for a while. And once it gets to that point, there's not a whole lot to do. So that's when it gets hard, is when things have been damaged, but have been damaged for so long, and not being able to fix them in time. So that's one of the many reasons as to why it's so important that Jimmy and John are doing this work down there, and continuing to have volunteers and get things processed, because that means things like that won't happen again. All right. Next question. What tips do you have for people who want to preserve their own historical documents and photos? This is an excellent question. There is a great book you can get, and I'll put the link in the chat. It's by my colleague Margot Note, and it's called Creating a Family Archives. And she does a great job covering all of the different things you could do with your family collection to help take care of it. But some quick tips off the top for anything that is historically or artistically valuable to you: you need to make sure it is not in direct sunlight. You need to make sure that it's in a somewhat climate controlled area, so not experiencing extreme heat or extreme cold. And you also want to make sure it's somewhat dry, so not humidity, like a very low humidity level. Keep it cool and dry, keep it out of the sunlight. Try and handle it just very minimally, so that there's not a lot of wear and tear or oil damage from your fingertips. But otherwise, just be gentle, use common sense, follow those tips, and then if you're interested in learning more, go check out Margot's book. Question: is there a plan to display any of the artifacts in the future? Perhaps a rotating exhibit in the library? And John, I can answer part of this one, and then I'll have you jump in. Part of the work that we're doing, Eric's done great work digitizing. We're now going to do publishing it online for a digital exhibit, which those will be available to the public. Once they're up, they'll be up there hopefully for a very, very long time to come. I know the library does have some display space, and that Jimmy is very keen on making sure that the collection is available to the public. But of course, with COVID, I know there's some question marks around that. So anything you can share with us, John?
Well, I know that in the past, Jimmy has displayed special newspapers, different events um, up near his office and all, and has displayed those for people to see. And Jimmy's just been so great because he's been so excited about history. And I know that he wants the public to appreciate what's here. And I know he will try to figure out any way he can to get objects from here up there as appropriate.
Excellent, thank you. Next question: where's the best place to find original house plans?
Okay, so the very short answer to that is that just from my bumping around in different archives in Astoria, I could probably list as many as 5 Victorian houses in Astoria that have plans in the archives, and as many as 10 craftsman houses in Astoria of whose plans still exist. And that's something because the archives, maybe the plans were, say, at City Hall, the number of times we've moved the city, or maybe there's fires or different reasons. So it's very difficult to find original plans. That being said, we do have, as you could see there, tables of blueprints. And one of my students started to go through them, and we separated them in different stacks, whether they be ecclesiastical or business or residential. And most of these are kind of mid-century buildings. And she spent between 40 and 60 hours going through these drawings, and she has made a spreadsheet, but we are far from getting to the base of the stack. And the next step will be, after getting a spreadsheet, we'll be taking all of these and getting them scanned at City Hall so that they will then be available for folks. So floor plans are really difficult to find. You might try a plan book, because many of the houses in Astoria have stock plans. So you might try a plan book, and we have some available in the stacks here. Another resource for you is the Lower Columbia Preservation Society and their website, which is lcpsociety.org. And on their resources page, they have a whole page on how to do the history on your house, step by step on how to do the history of your house. And in that, they have some photos that show a couple of the resources that we have here in the local area, actually in the library itself. So number one, Sanborn maps. Sanborn maps are very, very large maps that were put out, and they show the materials of the buildings, the size, the height, all of that. And you can trace your house over time and see it expand and contract, and the houses come and go in your neighborhood. And they start in the, I'm trying to think if we have one in the 70s, certainly in the 1880s, and go up to about 1958. And the reason you need to do this, even if you have a mid-century house, you need to find the address as listed on the Sanborn maps, because if you have a house that was built before 1955, it will not be the same address as it is to now, because in 1955, we changed all the addresses. Even if you have a Grand Street, the numbers are different. So you need to get the correct number so that you can then do the research according to that address. The other thing you see there is the reader. And we have a newspaper index, and that reads microfilm and it reads microfiche. And it enables you to make PDFs or send yourself emails of those images as you find them. The library upstairs does have microfiche files of many buildings in town. So if you take current address and historic address and speak with one of the librarians, they might be able to pull up a microfiche of your house if it got a building permit or something like that.
Very cool. Thank you, John.
Mhm.
Next question. Do you have any tips for how best to research the Astoria chapter of the Daughters of the American Revolution, DAR? It's celebrating a centennial this year. And I believe we have a photo.
Right, so we have a photo. This is a photo of the dedication of the Astoria post office, the first post office on 15th Street. And that's Mr. Norblad there, taking the DAR cloak off the monument. And I would recommend going to the Clatsop County Historical Society, because that's more of a county source than the city here. We have a box with a few records. They're mostly newspaper clippings of some of the celebrations. So for instance, between the post office, Fort Astoria, the Salt Karens, there's a number of places where the DAR has been involved, and there's newspaper clippings. But I think your best source is probably going to the Clatsop County Historical Society. The Heritage Museum has a wonderful set of archives there, or has an archives there, that I think is very, very helpful.
Next question. Was there an ice cream or soda shop in downtown Astoria?
Yes, There was. This is a question that was asked by a writer and doing a historical novel. And what I would recommend is using the local telephone directory. And the library has them as well as the Classic County Historical Society. And you can just go through these directories and find the shop at the location that you want it to be in your book. So a popular place might have been Hellberg's drugstore in Uniontown, and that's down where the Wana Federal Credit is today. But that was a very popular place. But I use these all the time in my research. The telephone directories are super, super helpful.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, in a couple of different projects I've worked on over the years, having access to directories, whether it was a city directory or a college directory or what have you, these are great snapshots in time of businesses that were running, people who were alive, where they lived, things like that. So they're a great place to start. All right, next question. I know that many streets in Astoria were wooden planks before the fire, but in some old photos, it looks like that some are concrete. Is that correct? Some were wood and some were concrete, or was it just an artifact of the photo?
Okay, so that's a good question. And Astoria didn't change from wood to concrete or wood to brick or at all at one time. And so those areas that are on the original shoreline might have brick beneath the current paving. And what you can do is go on the sidewalks, and there's these incise stamps that tell you the dates of when the sidewalks were poured. Now, if you're just thinking about the downtown in itself, we started with doing fill of the downtown. We had two campaigns of that. One was between 1914 and 1916, and we kind of created this L around downtown. So from, let's just say, 8th to 10th, and from the water to Exchange, and then a long Exchange to 16th. That was one system. Then the fire of 22 came, and then we completed putting in a concrete base at that time. So depending upon, again, what era you're looking for, the answer could be that somebody could, in fact, walk from brick to a street that's reinforced with concrete to one that has wooden planks, all in one day, all in one trip. So it just depends upon what era this person is in.
That is so cool. Such a great question. Thank you. Next question. Dr. Nellie Vernon served as the County and City Public Health Officer 1917 to 1918. What did that part of her job entail?
Okay, so she was both the city and county physician. And during the Spanish, so-called Spanish flu epidemic, she was essentially the Dr. Fauci of Astoria. And everybody had to come to her. All the doctors had to report to her, and she would report to the state. And she started trying to create a sanitary place for people and a place for people to be hospitalized. And she tried to, invoke different health habits that would get us through this terrible flu. So that's essentially what her job was. She was here, she was working, let's just say from about the turn of the century, 1904 or 5, and worked through at least 1940. And so we have a Cumtux article from the Classic County Historical Society, winter of 1997, if anybody would like to read more about her. There's a whole article about her written by Lisa Penner on this very specific subject. Here in the vortex, we have a number of related objects. So for instance, we have cards from people that are going to, say, the county poor farm or county hospital as such. And this is a way actually to do genealogical research of source, because it gives their parents, the place of birth, in many cases their death. And she probably would have been running around and seeing a lot of these folks. So we have those two items that kind of go together. Then what we have are a series of scrapbooks. And we have a scrapbooks, for instance, on the Tuberculosis Association, a group that was formed to get us through that. And that worked for many years. And so we also then have a county health scrapbook with newspaper clippings. And in this, this particular slide, this is dating to 1939. And what happened was that there is a syphilis outbreak. And it's very serious throughout the United States. And so a health officer from the state comes to educate Astorians. And at the time, the county health offices were in the Flavel Mansion that was county owned at that time. And it packed the whole Flavel house. They were showing a film on syphilis, and it just packed the whole place. Well, what was going to be a one-night event turned into a week-long event, because Astorians wouldn't let them leave until their social group had seen this film and got this education. And this, even, I think this is kind of funny, they even showed it at the PTA family night in Hammond. They had a family night potluck and showed a film on syphilis at that time. And so he educated, he came from the state, and they have this part about, you know, the crowd fires questions at him. And he goes through bit by bit what's going to happen. Oh, yes, and here's something interesting. 3,000 Brotherhood members see syphilis film. Yes, this is across, you know, this is in the Daily Astoria, and you think, wow, this is really popular. Okay, as far as I'm concerned, one of the great misprints in the Daily Astorian, there were only 300 members of the Finnish Brotherhood that turned up at this event, not 3,000. But in any case, they come, and he says, you know, he's going to give them these pertinent facts. And he says that we could wipe out this disease if every person could submit themselves to a blood test, because in that manner, the disease would be discovered, treated, and finally eliminated. So they were talking about tracing at that time. And they said that this has been super effective in Scandinavian countries. And then they asked, well, can a person be quarantined? And he answered that yes, that it was legal, and that it fell under the same kind of communicable diseases such as smallpox, diphtheria, etc. And that unless a patient submitted to treatment, they could be quarantined. And so they understood all of this in 1938 as to how to tackle these health crises. And the last part that he says here is that he wanted to point out that the treatment is available to all, even those without funds, in cooperation with the county health units throughout the state. So it's this public thing: educate, trace, quarantine, and vaccinate, and get rid of this. And so it's really interesting to see that and understand how they handled health crises in the 30s and beyond. So we have those kinds of records here.
That is so cool. And as you see, like events in history, we see some of the same things in terms of how people are acting or what we discover about ourselves, and you know, a bit of repetition there.
Yeah.
Next question, was there a cost involved to go to nursing school at St. Mary's? Was a high school diploma required to attend the school? Which is a great question, very specific. So I believe you have a suggestion for us.
Yeah, we don't have that information here. I would suggest, again, maybe trying the Historical Society. I know that they have printed Cumtux articles. Remember, Cumtux is their quarterly magazine. They printed that on nursing, and then also going through Providence as well. They have a pretty good archives there. But what we do have is we have receipts from another doctor who would be contemporary to say Dr. Vernon. This is Dr. Clara Waffle, and we have a lot of kind of personal receipts from her as well as a few medical receipts. And I just want to point this out again, just so you know that we have more here than newspaper clippings. We have the real artifacts here as well.
Excellent, thank you. Question. I would like to hear whatever APL has to offer regarding Ku Klux Klan activity in Astoria. I am interested in knowing what coverage/discussion was provided in the local newspapers. Plus, if you want to include anything about racial prejudice as evidenced in your historical documents, that would be appreciated.
Okay, so I'd like to begin that conversation, and it seems like it's in a strange place, but with the oldest artifact, or one of the oldest artifacts, in the basement of the library. And that is a family Bible. And this family Bible dates to 1728. And it was owned by the Slusher family. And in the 19-teens and 1920s, there was a growing fear. And the fear was that we had a corrupt sheriff, and that we had corrupt city hall, and that they weren't enforcing the laws, and specifically prohibition. There was a place called the Whistle Inn out in Flavel, out in Hammond, the Hammond area. And it was notorious. It became notorious for no other reason because at least two or more terrible car accidents happened after people went to this place, got really drunk, and killed and died in these crashes. And this just incited people more about this anti-prohibition, pro-prohibition, anti-alcohol feeling. And so they felt like the law was not being enforced and we have to do something. And so along came the KKK. And the KKK presented themselves as being kind of law enforcement. We want to make sure that people are safe. And the KKK also locally really focused on supporting prohibition. And one of the candidates, so they got a bunch of candidates together to run for public office. And one of the candidates was Harley Slusher, whose Bible we have here. Harley Slusher became the county sheriff, supposedly to enforce prohibition. Some say that he was also a bootlegger. Some would say that, he's taking this position and wiping out some of the competition. The KKK eventually said, maybe you're not doing your job because there's still a lot going on here. So the KKK formed themselves, and they formed themselves around this law enforcement deal. As I did the research on this, I came across an envelope which I was not aware of. I found a reference to it online when I was doing some other research. And this used to be in what we refer to as the vertical files. In file folders, upstairs, open to anybody. And this file folder, you had to know what was in it to see it, because it might have said Ku Klux Klan, but what it didn't say was, we have original documents from the Ku Klux Klan in the Astoria Public Library. And one of those documents was a handwritten letter, which you probably have read by now, but I'll read it to you anyway. And this is between Chessman, who is the editor of the newspaper, and Lem Deaver. And I'll explain Lem Deaver in a moment. Chessman, several days have elapsed since you wrote the dirty screed about me. I'm preparing to leave Astoria, as you said, and I demand a retraction of your personal strictures. I'll give you 48 hours to think it over and make the amends honorable. Otherwise, you and I are going to tangle. And so this was Lem Deaver, and Lem Deaver was kind of the guy who really got the word out about the KKK in Astoria, and he formed the newspaper that we have here in the next slide, the Western American. And the Western American published all this KKK literature. Well, they got in a big verbal fight with the Daily Astorian, and they said to him, this Astorian editor, Chessman, we want you to print our stuff. And Chessman and we have letters between the two of them. You can see on the official letterhead of the KKK, we also have letterhead from Chessman, where he says, look, I believe that the public needs to know all sides of things. And if you have legitimate things that you're gonna talk about, we'll print your articles, but keep your hands off my editorials. I'm gonna say what I want. And so Steve Forrester, who is our former editor of the Daily Astorian, his group just published a book in recent times that you can get a copy of. It's called Grit and Ink, about the newspaper family and really standing up to this fight. In the end, two things happened. Number one, the Ku Klux Klan didn't agree that he kept his end of the bargain. They kind of felt like he was biased against them, even within the articles themselves. But the other thing I find absolutely fascinating, and unfortunately, this is a photocopy of part of a letter between Deaver and Chessman. And it's just the final sentence. He says, I'm damn sorry, really, that we cannot agree, Chessman. I think you're a hell of a good fellow. So he grew to really admire Chessman's stubbornness and his integrity for standing up to him, even though they were against each other. What happened was that Deaver eventually broke away from the KKK and published books, exposés on the KKK. So we have that piece, but we also have, so we know that part, but we also have a document that we cannot date. We know it's after 1923. It doesn't list who the author is, but it's either our local KKK or it is the state KKK. And they are expressing that they are skeptical of the national group and what it stands for. So here's a document that they voted to accept their feelings. And I'm going to read you bits of it. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness under the American government, the unquestionable rights of free speech, free press, and the participation in the selection of their governing or ruling heads, that to enjoy and perpetuate these rights and privileges, native-born, white, Gentile, American citizens throughout the United States bound themselves together as local units in their respective communities, as branches of the National Organization of the Knights of the Ku Klux Klan, incorporated, located at the Atlanta, Georgia. So they've made this statement that they are a part of it. But what they have found is they are breaking away from that. So what they're seeing is that the imperial wizard has surrounded himself with grand dragons who have made it so that he will be emperor for life. And they are saying this is anti-democratic. In fact, what they have said is that the history of the present regime has been a history of usurpation, incompetency, tyranny, waste, espionage, and coercion, all having in direct object the establishment of an absolute autocracy over the membership of the local clans. And to prove this, these are the facts. So they're saying here that the ideals and the principles that they represent are not true because the fact that he cannot be removed, that he is Grand Wizard for life. Now, I can read you that, but I think that's enough on that piece. So they say there's a problem with that. There's many problems with that. And one in particular is this Article 1, Section 3 of their Constitution. And what it says is that it specified the unlimited duties and prerogatives of the imperial wizard, which they say that it's an organization of military character. But the problem with this imperial wizard who cannot be removed is that he has taken the KKK from having military character to creating a literal military. And the next problem with that is that he has taken it from being an empire in ideals to a literal empire. So we have these documents here, these original documents here that are so important because they allow us to come and they allow us to think and understand and reflect. And they allow us to see how things can go south really fast. The KKK disappeared, or at least went under, certainly by 1928, if not by 26. And I should mention, just to back up a little bit, that not only did we have the county sheriff as a KKK, our entire city council and mayor were a KKK. And we have this picture, I have this picture of them all surrounding the city manager. And if you can imagine this young man being surrounded by all these old KKK guys at the very time that City of Astoria burns and we lose 30-some blocks in our downtown, and this young man is trying to rebuild the downtown. He apparently was a plant by the KKK, but he started to reject them and did what he wanted to and what he thought needed to be done. So a number of things happened. Number one, the locals looked up and they realized that while they were patriotic, the KKK was not. And they broke away from it. So that happened. We all know that things go under the surface. So again, it's important that we remember this. So the next piece I want to show you is that we have city scrapbooks. Somebody kept newspaper articles from 1953 to 2000, things that are of interest to the area. In 1992, a white supremacist group came to Astoria and they sent letters to every single junior at Astoria High School, inviting them to become a part of the white supremacist group. So a number of things happened. Parents freaked out. The students, in many cases, didn't know what white supremacy was. So thank God the social studies teacher stepped in and educated them. And there was this fear because the economy was bad, and people tend to join these groups when they're feeling helpless and when they're feeling out of control in their surroundings. And that was going on. We figured we have to educate people so that this doesn't happen. And there's a quote here that says, there's a tie between people feeling helpless and hopeless and an increase in racial tensions. And so there was this fear in that way. And then the group also in their letter told the students how they might form their own white supremacist group and the kinds of things that one might do for that. And so I'm just reading this, and it's from that letter. The best way to get positive results is to prey upon people's fears. To start with, I suggest low-key educational materials, things on immigration laws, how it affects their tax dollars, the benefits the minority gets that whites don't. So this came through. And again, the community rose up. But what, the article finishes by this quote from a community member saying, the most vulnerable are the lost, aimless, and drifting, a person whose psychological needs are not being met by mainstream society. People don't generally join these groups because of supremacist tendencies. However, hate groups that can establish any kind of presence are feeding on racist tendencies in a community. Quote, they are the tip of the iceberg. The tip can break off, but the iceberg is not going to go away. And so this is why it is so important that we retain materials like this in our public library so that anybody can see them, anybody can read them, we can learn from the past and not have to repeat what we have done. So that's the answer to that question.
Thank you for sharing that with us, John, and for outlining it so well in terms of it, even in just the last 100 years, how we've seen it crop up throughout the decades. And of course, presently, it is unfortunately, all of the things you said in terms of, bad economy and preying on people's fears and the racial undertones is obviously still an issue for us. I think it's also important to note for those who aren't quite as familiar with Oregon history is that Oregon as a state as well, not just Astoria, has had a white supremacy problem. It was established as the white utopia and had basically it was, come here, only white people, no black people, which then throughout the decades, while that went away, there was still redlining in districts and pushing traditionally African American, Black Americans out of neighborhoods, that kind of thing. So it is not just Astoria and also unfortunately not just Oregon, but an issue that we're still trying to tackle. And as you said, it's while this is certainly not a great part of our history, we still need to have access to it and to shine some light on it and continue learning from it.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you everybody for your questions. Those were some great, very macro level, broad questions and some very great, very specific, detailed questions. I know that John and I are going to stick around in the chat box for a few more minutes to finish answering any of your questions that may have showed up there. Also, if you think of questions later or if you're viewing this video after the premiere, I have Jimmy Pearson's contact information up there. Again, he's the library director for Astoria Public Library. And John Goodenberger as the city historian, that is his city email address. So if you have some more history related questions for John, you can follow him there. If you happen to have archival questions, you can also contact me as well. You can find me at rachelchristine.com for that. Um, thank you so much for joining us on this. Thank you, John, for partnering with me on this. I've had a great time with you. And any last things you'd like to share with us before we go?
Um, my only last thing is support your public library. It's a valuable institution.
Absolutely. Supporting your local public library, and if Astoria is your local library, given the amount of treasures there, both in terms of public services, but also historical treasures, I know that Jimmy has really worked tirelessly to try and take care of both the community and this collection. So, as people who work with him and the collections, please do continue to support Jimmy and the Astoria Public Library. And with that, John and I will sign off for now. We hope you've enjoyed us chatting and bringing these collection highlights to you. And thank you again so much.
Thanks.